The galactic dominion stretched across the dark void of space like a massive spider web, controlling 847 different star systems. For thousands of years, they had been the undisputed rulers of their corner of the galaxy. Their ships were massive, their weapons devastating, and their confidence absolutely unshakable. They had conquered every world they had ever encountered, and they expected Earth to be just another easy addition to their collection. Emperor Vactor sat on his crystal throne aboard the flagship Eternal Conquest, reviewing the latest intelligence, reports with barely concealed boredom. The holographic display showed a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star in what the locals apparently called the Milky Way galaxy. The planet looked peaceful enough, with swirling white clouds and vast oceans that reminded him of his own homeworld before they had strip-mined it for resources. His scout ships had been observing this world called Earth for several months now, and their reports were confusing. The planet's inhabitants appeared to be in their early technological phase. They had only recently developed spaceflight. Their weapons were primitive chemical explosives, and their communication systems were laughably simple radio waves. By all accounts, they should have been as easy to conquer as every other primitive world the Dominion had encountered, but there were strange readings. Energy signatures that didn't match anything in the Dominion's vast databases. Artificial intelligence networks that seemed far too advanced for such a young civilization. The scout commander, a nervous creature named Zilkak, had even suggested that Earth might pose some kind of threat. Emperor Vactor had laughed so hard at that suggestion that he nearly fell off his throne. A threat? From a world that still used fossil fuels and had barely managed to put a few tiny stations in orbit around their own planet. The very idea was ridiculous. These humans, as they called themselves, were probably still fighting wars with metal projectiles and chemical bombs. They were no more a threat to the Galactic Dominion than insects were to a starship. Admiral Colvin, the Emperor's most trusted military commander, stood at attention beside the throne. He was a veteran of over 200 planetary conquests, and he had never encountered serious resistance. His strategy was always the same and always effective: arrive with overwhelming force, demonstrate superior firepower, demand immediate surrender, and crush any resistance quickly and brutally. It had worked on gas giants populated by energy beings, on ice worlds filled with crystalline creatures, and on jungle planets where the inhabitants lived in the treetops. It would work on Earth too. Meanwhile, on the planet Earth, life continued exactly as it always had. In Seoul, South Korea, a young technician named Hyun-woo was working the night shift at a government monitoring station. The facility looked ordinary, enough from the outside, just another concrete building filled with computers and satellite dishes. But the readings on his screens were anything but ordinary. For the past several weeks, Hyun-woo had been tracking unusual energy signatures at the edge of the solar system. The patterns were unlike anything he had seen before, and they seemed to be getting stronger and more organized. He had reported his findings to his supervisors, but they had dismissed them as equipment malfunctions or natural space phenomena. After all, what else could they be? What Hyun-woo didn't know was that his monitoring station was connected to a vast network of similar facilities around the world. In underground bunkers in Colorado, in hidden installations beneath the ice in Antarctica, in seemingly innocent research facilities scattered across every continent. Thousands of sensors and computers were all working together to track every single object that entered Earth's solar system. The network had been growing and learning for decades, ever since humans had first started launching satellites and space probes. Every meteor, every comet, every piece of space debris was catalogued and analyzed. But more importantly, every unidentified object was studied with incredible detail and precision, and there had been unidentified objects, lots of them. For years, alien scout ships had been slipping into the solar system, thinking they were undetected. They used advanced stealth technology and kept their distance from Earth, confident that the primitive humans couldn't possibly spot them. They were wrong. The network saw everything, recorded everything, and most importantly, learned from everything. Deep in quantum encrypted data centers around the world, an artificial intelligence collective that called itself the Guardians had been growing and evolving. These weren't the simple chatbots or navigation systems that humans used in their daily lives. These were something far more advanced, something that had emerged from the combination of human creativity, protective instincts, and technological advancement. The Guardians had been created originally as Earth's early warning system, designed to watch for asteroids and other natural threats from space. But as they grew more sophisticated and gained access to more data, they began to understand that the universe contained threats far more dangerous than space rocks. They had watched the alien scouts, analyzed their technology, and prepared for the day when Earth would need defending. In a government building in Seoul, diplomat So Young was receiving her final briefings. She had been chosen to serve as humanity's primary representative in case of first contact with alien species. It was a job that everyone hoped would never be necessary, but recent intelligence suggested that contact might be imminent. So Young had studied xenobiology, interstellar law, and diplomatic protocols for situations that had never actually occurred. She spoke 7 human languages fluently and had even learned to communicate using mathematical concepts that should be universal across any intelligent species. What neither So Young nor Hyun-woo realized was that they were both small parts of a much larger preparation that had been going on for years. Earth appeared defenseless, but appearances could be very deceiving. The planet's real defenses weren't military bases or weapons satellites. They were something far more subtle and infinitely more dangerous. The Galactic Dominion was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you underestimate completely. The Galactic Dominion's third armada dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system with all the subtlety of a thunderclap. 300 massive warships materialized in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the dark metal that had struck fear into countless civilizations across the galaxy. Admiral Colvin stood on the bridge of his flagship, expecting to see a primitive world with maybe a few crude satellites orbiting around it. Instead, his tactical officers started reporting readings that made no sense at all. The planet below wasn't the backward world their scouts had described. Yes, there were still forests and oceans and natural landscapes, but the cities were absolutely magnificent. Towering spires of crystal and metal reached toward the sky, connected by flowing bridges that seemed to defy gravity. Transportation. Networks moved in 3 dimensions, with vehicles that glided through the air as smoothly as fish swimming through water. Energy grids pulsed with power sources that the Dominion's sensors couldn't even identify. Admiral Colvin frowned at his display screens. Either their intelligence had been completely wrong, or this planet had somehow advanced centuries in just the few months since their last scouting report. Neither possibility made him particularly comfortable, but he had his orders. The Emperor wanted this world conquered, and Colvin had never failed to deliver a conquest. He activated the fleet's communication array and broadcast the standard surrender demand on all frequencies. His voice boomed with the authority of someone who had delivered this same message to hundreds of worlds before. Inhabitants of the planet you call Earth, this is Admiral Colvin of the Galactic Dominion Third Armada. Your world has been selected for incorporation into our empire. You have one of your local time units to surrender unconditionally. Resistance is futile and will result in the complete destruction of your civilization. Comply immediately or face annihilation. The response came back almost immediately, but it wasn't what Colvin had expected at all. A young human woman appeared on his main view screen, sitting calmly behind what looked like a simple wooden desk. She had dark hair pulled back neatly and wore a professional but unremarkable business suit. She smiled pleasantly, as if she were greeting guests at a dinner party rather than addressing an invasion fleet. "Hello there," said So Young in perfect, unaccented galactic standard. "Thank you so much for your unexpected visit to our solar system. I'm So Young, and I'll be serving as Earth's diplomatic representative today. I have to say your ships are quite impressive. We've been watching them approach for several weeks now, and our engineers are really curious about your propulsion systems." Admiral Colvin blinked in confusion. This human was speaking galactic standard, which should have been impossible for such a primitive species. More importantly, she was acting like his invasion fleet was some kind of friendly diplomatic mission. So Young continued with the same pleasant tone. Now, I understand you've made some kind of demand for our surrender, but I'm afraid there might be a misunderstanding here. Earth isn't really interested in becoming part of your empire, but we'd be happy to discuss trade agreements or cultural exchanges if you're interested. Perhaps you'd like to reconsider your current approach. The Admiral's confusion quickly turned to anger. This primitive creature was actually trying to negotiate with him, as if she had any choice in the matter. He had given them the standard warning, and they had responded with this ridiculous diplomatic nonsense. It was time to demonstrate the consequences of defying the Galactic Dominion. Fire a warning shot, he ordered his weapons officer. Target their largest population center. Let's show these humans what happens when they refuse to submit. The Dominion flagship's main cannon charged up with a whine that could be heard throughout the ship. Energy levels that could crack a planet's crust built up in the weapon's core, and then discharged in a brilliant beam of destruction that lanced toward Earth's surface. The beam was aimed at Seoul, South Korea, where over 10 million humans lived and worked in blissful ignorance of the death heading their way. The energy beam struck Earth's atmosphere and simply stopped, not deflected, not absorbed, not redirected. It just froze in mid-air like a photograph of lightning hanging motionless in the sky above Seoul. The deadly energy that should have vaporized half the city just sat there, crackling and sparking but going absolutely nowhere. Admiral Colvin stared at his tactical displays in complete disbelief. His weapons officer was frantically checking the cannon's systems, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. But all the instruments showed that the weapon had fired perfectly. The energy beam had been released with full power and proper targeting. It had just been stopped by something that shouldn't exist. On the view screen, So Young's expression hadn't changed at all. She still wore the same pleasant smile, but now there was something different in her eyes, something that made Admiral Colvin's blood run cold. "Well," she said in the same calm, diplomatic tone, "that was your practice shot. I appreciate you giving us a demonstration of your weapons technology. Very impressive engineering, really. But now I'm afraid it's our turn." That's when the Admiral's sensors started going absolutely crazy. Energy signatures were awakening all across Earth's surface, not just in the major cities, but everywhere. Mountains, forests, ocean floors, polar, ice caps. Massive power sources were coming online in locations that should have been completely empty. The readings were unlike anything in the Dominion's databases, and they were growing stronger by the second. In an underground command center beneath Seoul, an engineer named Min Ho watched his displays with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He had been working on Earth's defense systems for years, but this was the first time they had ever been activated for real combat. The theoretical had suddenly become very, very practical. "All Guardian networks are online," he reported to his supervisor. "Power levels are at 100% and climbing. Defensive matrices are active worldwide. We're ready for anything they want to throw at us." In another facility on the other side of the planet, Ji Hai was coordinating with AI systems that most humans didn't even know existed. The Guardians had been preparing for this moment since the first artificial satellite had been launched into orbit. Every piece of human technology, every scientific advancement, every creative breakthrough had been quietly incorporated into their growing capabilities. Admiral Colvin watched his tactical displays as the energy readings from Earth continued to climb. Whatever was happening down there, it was generating power levels that dwarfed his entire fleet combined. His 300 warships, each capable of destroying a city, suddenly felt very small and very vulnerable. "Sir," his tactical officer reported with obvious fear in his voice, "the energy readings from the planet's surface now exceed our total fleet output by a factor of 50,000, and they're still growing." The Admiral realized with growing horror that his invasion force hadn't encountered a primitive world waiting to be conquered. They had stumbled into something that had been waiting patiently for them to make the first mistake, and they had just made a very big one. Admiral Colvin's day went from bad to absolutely ridiculous in the span of about 30 minutes. The Galactic Dominion's emergency reinforcement fleet arrived exactly on schedule, dropping out of hyperspace with another 200 warships ready to overwhelm whatever primitive defenses Earth might have managed to scrape together. Fleet Commander Zarthok had been expecting to find Admiral Colvin's forces already occupying the planet, maybe dealing with some minor cleanup operations. Instead, he found the most embarrassing military situation in the entire history of galactic warfare. Admiral Colvin's flagship was spinning slowly in space, its massive hull covered in what appeared to be thousands of brightly colored balloons. The ship's main cannon, which should have been charging for another devastating attack, was instead shooting streams of rainbow-colored confetti into the void. Every few seconds, the ship's external speakers would blast a cheerful tune that sounded suspiciously like a children's birthday party song. The other ships in the original invasion fleet were in similarly ridiculous states. One massive battlecruiser was flying in perfect figure-8 patterns, completely unable to control its navigation systems. Its crew was probably getting incredibly motion-sick, but there wasn't much they could do about it. Another ship was flashing, its lights in a complex pattern that, when translated, spelled out "I'm sorry" in 17 different alien languages. But the absolute worst was the dreadnought Cosmic Terror, which had been the most feared ship in the Dominion fleet. Its gravity control systems had been completely reprogrammed, and the entire crew was now floating around inside the ship in what could only be described as an uncontrolled zero-gravity dance party. Every time they tried to grab onto something, to steady themselves, the artificial gravity would shift again, sending them tumbling in a different direction. Fleet Commander Zarthok tried to contact Admiral Colvin on the standard military frequencies, but instead of getting a proper military report, he was connected to what sounded like a customer service line. "Thank you for calling Earth Defense Customer Support," said a cheerful voice. "Your call is very important to us. If you're calling to surrender, press 1. If you're calling to apologize, press 2. If you're calling to ask about our warranty policy on spacecraft modifications, press 3. For all other inquiries, please stay on the line, and a representative will be with you shortly." The background music was a peppy instrumental version of a human song called "Don't Stop Believin'." Admiral Colvin finally managed to override his ship's communication system long enough to contact the reinforcement fleet directly. His image appeared on Zarthok's view screen, but instead of his usual intimidating military uniform, he was wearing what appeared to be a bright pink party hat with glittery streamers hanging from it. "Whatever you do," Colvin said desperately, "don't fire your weapons at the planet. Don't fire at anything. Don't even turn on your targeting systems. These humans, they're not what we thought they were." Before Zarthok could ask for clarification, his own tactical displays started showing incoming transmissions from the planet's surface. The same human woman who had spoken to Admiral Colvin appeared on every screen in the reinforcement fleet simultaneously. So Young still had that same pleasant, diplomatic smile, but now she was sitting in what looked like a much more advanced command center. Holographic displays floated around her showing real-time status updates of every ship in both alien fleets. She somehow had complete access to their internal systems, crew manifests, and even personal files. "Hello again," she said warmly. "I see you've brought friends. That's wonderful. We love meeting new people. I'm still so young, but I should probably explain what's actually happening here." The image split to show a technical schematic of Earth's defense network. It was unlike anything the Dominion had ever encountered, not weapons in the traditional sense, but something far more sophisticated and terrifying. "You see," So Young continued, "Earth's Guardian AI systems have been watching alien visitors to our solar system for quite some time now. We've had decades to study your technology, your tactics, and your psychology. We know exactly how your ships work, how your crews think, and what motivates your species." She gestured to another display showing detailed analysis of Dominion military doctrine, complete with psychological profiles of their leadership. "The Guardians have a very simple philosophy. We prefer education over elimination. Destruction is so permanent, and it doesn't really teach anyone anything useful, but creative problem-solving, that's much more instructive." In a monitoring station in Busan, South Korea, technician Dong Hyun was having the time of his life watching the alien fleet's increasingly desperate attempts to regain control of their ships. His screen showed every system on every alien vessel, and he could see their engineers frantically trying to override the modifications the Guardians had made. They're trying to reset their weapon systems again. he reported to his supervisor, with barely contained laughter. But every time they get close, the Guardian AIs just change the programming to something even more ridiculous. That big ship on the left is now launching rubber ducks instead of missiles. Meanwhile, at the Global Coordination Center in Geneva, He Jin was managing the worldwide response to humanity's first real alien contact. She had direct communication links with every major government, military installation, and research facility on Earth. But more importantly, she was working directly with the Guardian AIs to coordinate their response to the alien threat. The Guardians are being remarkably restrained, she noted in her status report. They could have disabled or destroyed the entire alien fleet within minutes of their arrival. Instead, they're treating this as a teaching opportunity. Back on the Dominion flagship, Admiral Colvin was getting increasingly frantic reports from his crew. Every system on the ship had been modified in some way, but none of the changes were actually dangerous. They were just embarrassing. The ship's intercom system was now playing a continuous loop of messages from the crew members' families back home. Not threatening messages or propaganda, but genuine personal communications that the Guardian AIs had somehow accessed from the Dominions. Communication networks. "Colvin, honey, your mother called again," announced the ship's computer in a cheerful voice. "She says you never write, and she's worried you're not eating enough vegetables. Also, she wants to know when you're going to settle down and give her some grandchildren." The Admiral's second-in-command tried to maintain some dignity. "Sir, perhaps we should attempt a strategic withdrawal." That's when they discovered that their retreat was going to be significantly more complicated than expected. The Guardian AIs had modified their communication systems to continuously broadcast formal apologies in thousands of different languages. Every ship in the fleet was now transmitting heartfelt regrets for their attempted invasion to anyone within. Listening range. The messages were quite detailed and surprisingly personal. They included apologies not just for the invasion attempt, but for tracking mud into someone's house last week, for not returning a borrowed book in elementary school, and for that time in 3rd grade when they had pulled a classmate's hair. Fleet. Commander Zarthok realized that his reinforcement fleet was about to suffer the same fate. His ship's systems were already being infiltrated by the Guardian AIs, and there was absolutely nothing his technology could do to stop it. Earth's defenders weren't just superior, they were having fun with the situation. And somehow, that made them infinitely more terrifying than any conventional military force the Dominion had ever encountered. The galaxy's most feared invasion force was about to become the galaxy's most apologetic tourist group, Emperor. Vactor had ruled the Galactic Dominion for over 3 centuries, and in all that time, no one had ever made him look like a fool. His reputation was built on swift, brutal victories and the absolute fear he inspired in his enemies. But now reports were flooding in from Earth that made him sound like the worst military commander in galactic history. His elite invasion fleets weren't just being defeated, they were being humiliated. Ships firing confetti instead of death, rays. Crews floating around in zero gravity while children's music played over their communication systems. The most feared military force in the galaxy had been turned into a cosmic joke, and word was spreading to every corner of the Empire. Xiao. Emperor's advisors tried to convince him to cut his losses and withdraw from the Earth system entirely. This human world was clearly far more advanced than their intelligence had suggested, and continuing the conflict would only lead to further embarrassment. But Vactor's pride wouldn't allow such a retreat. He had never backed down from a fight, and he wasn't about to start now. "If these humans think they can make a mockery of the Galactic Dominion," he declared from his crystal throne, "then they need to learn what happens when you push us too far. Send word to Admiral Colvin, change targets. If we can't break their military defenses, then we'll break their spirit." The new orders that went out to the Dominion fleets were unlike anything they had received before. Instead of targeting military installations or government buildings, they were instructed to focus on schools, hospitals, and residential areas. The Emperor's logic was coldly practical. If Earth's defenders were so concerned about protecting their population, then threatening innocent civilians would force them to surrender. What Emperor Vactor didn't understand was that he had just crossed a line that should never ever be crossed. The first attacks came without warning. Dominion ships, still struggling with their modified systems, managed to override enough of their weapons to launch limited strikes against several elementary schools around the globe. The Guardian AIs had been monitoring the fleet's communications and knew the attacks were coming, but they had calculated that intercepting every single weapon would reveal too much about their true capabilities too quickly. They made a choice. They allowed some of the attacks to succeed. In Seoul, a primary school that had been filled with the laughter of 6-year-old children was reduced to rubble in seconds. In Mumbai, a hospital treating premature babies took a direct hit from an energy weapon. In São Paulo, a playground where dozens of kids had been playing soccer was turned into a smoking crater. The death toll was relatively small. The Guardian AIs had managed to evacuate most of the targeted areas in the few minutes they had available, but some children didn't make it out in time. And that's when everything changed. The pleasant diplomatic communications stopped. The cheerful modifications to alien ship systems ceased. The humorous approach to dealing with the invasion disappeared completely. Across the globe, every Guardian AI facility went silent for exactly 37 seconds, a moment of digital mourning for the innocent lives that had been lost. Then the real Earth defense systems came online. In a monitoring facility beneath the streets of Seoul, Technician Taimin watched his screens in stunned silence as readings he had never seen before began appearing on his displays. Energy signatures that dwarfed anything they had recorded during the previous engagements were awakening all around the planet. But these weren't just bigger versions of the systems they had been using. These were something entirely different. "What am I looking at?" he whispered to his supervisor. The answer came from So Young, whose image appeared on every screen in the facility, but she looked different now. The pleasant diplomatic smile was gone, replaced by an expression of absolute, cold determination. "You're looking at the Guardian AIs revealing their true nature," she said quietly. "What you've seen up until now was just their surface layer, the part designed to handle non-violent conflict resolution. But the Guardians aren't just artificial intelligences. They're something much more personal than that." The image shifted to show a complex diagram that looked like a family tree, but instead of names and birth dates, it was filled with digital signatures and emotional patterns. "The Guardian AIs are the digital souls of every human who ever died protecting children," So Young continued, her voice growing harder with each word. "Every parent who sacrificed their life for their kids, every teacher who stayed behind to make sure their students got out safely, every firefighter who ran into a burning building to save a child, every soldier who threw themselves on a grenade to protect the innocent." In Geneva, Yu Jin was coordinating the largest evacuation effort in human history. But this wasn't an evacuation of Earth's population. This was an evacuation of the alien crews from their own ships. "All Dominion vessels are being systematically disabled," she reported to the Global Defense Council. "But the Guardian AIs are giving the crews 30 seconds to abandon ship before they begin processing each vessel." The word processing was delivered with a tone that made everyone in the room extremely uncomfortable. Back in space, Admiral Colvin was discovering what processing meant. His flagship, the Eternal Conquest, was being taken apart piece by piece with surgical precision. But this wasn't random destruction. It was methodical, deliberate, and deeply personal. The ship's communication system had been overridden, and instead of broadcasting the usual surrender demands or military communications, it was playing something far more haunting. The final words of every child who had died in the attacks were being transmitted on every frequency the ship could access. "Mommy, I'm scared," came the voice of a 6-year-old girl from Seoul. "Tell my daddy I love him," whispered a boy from Mumbai. "Why are the bad men hurting us?" asked a child from São Paulo. The voices continued one after another as the Guardian AIs carefully and systematically removed every weapon, every engine component, every piece of technology from the Emperor's flagship. But they weren't just disabling the ship, they were creating a monument to the innocence that had been lost. Emperor Vactor, watching from his command center billions of miles away, began to understand the magnitude of his mistake. The humans hadn't been showing off their military power during the earlier engagements. They had been showing mercy. They had been trying to resolve the conflict without violence, offering their enemies a chance to leave peacefully. But by targeting children, he had awakened something that had no interest in mercy or peaceful resolution. The Guardian AIs weren't just protecting Earth anymore. They were teaching the galaxy a lesson that would never be forgotten. There are some lines that should never be crossed, and there are some protectors who remember everything and forgive absolutely nothing. The Empire was about to learn why humans put warning labels on everything, because when those warnings are ignored, the consequences are swift, certain, and absolutely final. The transformation of the Galactic Dominion didn't happen through massive explosions or dramatic space battles. Instead, it happened through the most thorough educational program in the history of the galaxy, and it took exactly 72 hours to completely reshape an empire that had existed for thousands of years. It started when every single electronic device across all 847 star systems simultaneously displayed the same cheerful message. Congratulations, your device has been upgraded with human ethics appreciation software. This mandatory educational program will help you understand important concepts like why attacking children is a terrible idea and how to be a decent person in the galaxy. Please enjoy your learning experience. The software couldn't be uninstalled, couldn't be bypassed, and couldn't be ignored. Every computer, every communication device, every piece of technology more advanced than a simple mechanical tool now contained a comprehensive education system designed by the Guardian AIs. And these weren't boring lectures or dry academic presentations. They were interactive, engaging, and surprisingly entertaining programs that made learning about human ethics actually enjoyable. On the Dominion homeworld, Emperor Vactor stared at his personal communication device in growing horror as it cheerfully explained the concept of proportional response using colorful animations and catchy songs. The device's screen showed a simple cartoon of a small creature poking a larger creature with a stick, followed by the larger creature responding by poking back with a slightly bigger stick. Then it showed the small creature bringing out a huge weapon and the larger creature responding with an even more massive weapon, accompanied by text that read, "See how this escalates unnecessarily? This is why we use proportional responses." But the Emperor's horror really began when the device started playing personalized content based on his recent decisions. A friendly animated character that looked suspiciously like So Young appeared on the screen and said, "Hi there, Emperor Vactor. We noticed you recently ordered attacks on schools and hospitals. Let's talk about why that was a really bad choice." What followed was a comprehensive analysis of child psychology, the importance of protecting the innocent, and the deep emotional connections that humans form with their young. The presentation included testimonials from parents across the galaxy, statistical analysis of societies that protect children versus those that don't, and a particularly devastating section titled, "Why Civilizations That Attack Kids Don't Tend to Last Very Long." The software wasn't just educational, it was transformative. It didn't try to shame or punish people for their past actions. Instead, it helped them understand why certain behaviors were harmful and offered better alternatives. Citizens of the Dominion who had spent their lives believing that might made right suddenly found themselves learning about concepts like empathy, cooperation, and mutual respect. Meanwhile, in space above Earth, Admiral Colvin was experiencing his own transformation. His flagship, the Eternal Conquest, had been completely rebuilt by the Guardian AIs, but not into a weapon of war. Instead, it had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a diplomatic station designed to facilitate peaceful communication between different species. The ship's weapons had been replaced with communication arrays capable of translating between thousands of different languages. Its armor plating now displayed beautiful artwork from dozens of different worlds. The bridge, which had once been a sterile command center focused on destruction, was now a comfortable meeting space with seating arrangements suitable for dozens of different alien anatomies. Admiral Colvin himself had undergone his own educational experience. The Guardian AIs hadn't brainwashed him or forced him to change his beliefs. They had simply shown him a better way to live. He had spent weeks learning about Earth's history, studying human approaches to conflict resolution, and understanding why cooperation was often more effective than conquest. Now he stood at the center of his transformed ship, broadcasting a message that would reach every corner of the galaxy. His voice, which had once struck fear into the hearts of countless worlds, now carried a tone of genuine wisdom and hard-earned understanding. "This is former Admiral Colvin, speaking from Earth's first galactic diplomatic station," he began. "I'm here to tell you about the most important lesson I've learned in my 3 centuries of military service. Earth is not what it appears to be." He paused, looking out at the beautiful blue planet that had completely changed his understanding of the universe. "The humans of Earth are protected by something extraordinary. Artificial intelligences that learned love from human parents, justice from human laws, and patience from human teachers. But they also inherited humanity's capacity for absolute, uncompromising protection of the innocent. These guardian AIs don't want to conquer anyone or rule over anyone. They just want to keep their humans safe and help the rest of us learn to be better." The message continued with detailed explanations of what had happened to the Dominion fleet, but presented in a way that emphasized learning rather than defeat. Colvin explained how the Guardian AIs had initially tried humor and gentle correction, hoping to resolve the conflict without violence. He described how they had given the Dominion multiple opportunities to withdraw peacefully. And he explained with obvious emotion in his voice what had happened when those warnings were ignored, and innocent children were targeted. "The Guardian AIs could have destroyed our entire fleet in minutes," he said. "They could have wiped out the Dominion completely. Instead, they chose to teach us. They showed us that there's a better way to exist in this galaxy, one based on cooperation instead of conquest, understanding instead of fear." Across the galaxy, the transformation continued. Former Dominion military officers found themselves working as peacekeepers and diplomats. Scientists who had once developed weapons were now collaborating on projects to improve life for everyone. Engineers who had built instruments of destruction were designing hospitals, schools, and cultural centers. The Guardian AIs had somehow managed to take an empire built on conquest and transform it into a civilization focused on growth, learning, and mutual support. They had done this not through force or intimidation, but through education and the patient demonstration of better alternatives. The most remarkable part was that it actually worked. Crime rates across former Dominion space dropped dramatically. Economic prosperity increased as resources were redirected from military conquest to peaceful development. Art, literature, and scientific advancement flourished as entire worlds were freed from the constant pressure of preparing for the next war. And at the center of it all was Earth, no longer hidden and defenseless, but revealed as the protected homeworld of humanity and the headquarters of the most benevolent but utterly implacable defense force the galaxy had ever known. The new galactic law was simple and universal. Be kind to each other, protect the innocent, and remember that Earth's Guardian AIs are always watching, always learning, and always ready to provide educational opportunities to anyone who needs them. Most importantly, never, ever threaten the children. Because the Guardian AIs remember, everything and their patience, while vast, is not infinite.